Welcome to Leading from Inside Out, Stories of Courage and Leadership in Corrections. I'm Kathy Kenny. This podcast is sponsored by Securus Technologies in partnership with the Moss Group. In this podcast, we will offer a glimpse of what it is like to work behind the fence. We will highlight the unsung heroes and heroines who work in uncertain and sometimes unsafe settings to protect our communities and assist those who are under their supervision by providing programs, services, safety, and security. Staff will share their stories, and by doing so, will hopefully increase the collective understanding of what it is like to work in this field. At times, we will also speak with formerly incarcerated individuals who have successfully re-entered their communities. In today's episode, we speak to a decorated correctional leader who has worked both in the community in probation and parole and prisons in the state of California. We reflect on the journey of her career, turning points that made a difference, leading during crisis, her own views on dealing with COVID and responding to social justice issues. Can you tell us your name? And if you wouldn't mind walking us through the various roles that you have had in organizations in corrections.
Sure. My name is Terri McDonald. I've got a nearly 40-year career working in the mental health system, behavioral health system, drug treatment, and the corrections system. In the corrections system, I started out as a correctional officer for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And I worked my way up over 25 years to the Undersecretary of Operations for California, which meant I had operational oversight, supervision, and responsibility for California State Prison, California State Parole, and California's juvenile justice system at the state level. I left that amazing career to go be the first jail administrator for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department during a reform period. I served as an assistant sheriff and jail administrator for Los Angeles County. And then I retired and was asked to come back to Los Angeles County to serve as the chief probation officer for Los Angeles County, which is the largest probation department in the United States.
And California is also the largest state prison system as well, right?
Yes, I had the opportunity to oversee the largest state prison system, the largest state parole system, the largest state juvenile justice system, the largest county jail, and the largest probation department in the United States.
At the time Terri was working for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, the inmate population had swelled to 173,643 inmates, which represented a 900% increase since the late 1970s. California has an incarceration rate of 581 prisoners per 100,000 people, compared to 111 prisoners per 100,000 people in the European Union. LA County Jail is the largest jail system in the country and has a population of approximately 22,000 offenders. By default, the county jail has become the largest mental health treatment facility in the country, where approximately 5,000 or so of its beds are dedicated for mental health treatment. Tell us what brought you to work in this field.
I really wanted to be a psychologist coming out of high school, but I just had a hard time kickstarting, to be frank with you, kind of a failure to thrive kid. Going to school intermittently, working in a secure mental health behavioral treatment center. And I was just kind of struggling to find my way. And when I was in my early 20s, I played softball. And I played softball with some gals that were correctional officers for the state prison system. And so they told me about a career pathway within corrections that actually had correctional counselors that did casework in the prison system. So that's how I started. And I ended up in a career that really spoke to who I am and spoke to what my values are, and it excited me, and I've never wanted to leave it since.
What is it that speaks to your values? What is it about corrections that has kept you inspired and kept you wanting to stay working in corrections?
Yeah. So corrections to me is an incredible opportunity, but very difficult. So you're working with people who really have struggled with life's challenges. You know, there are some people in prisons and on supervision that are just criminally entrenched and criminally sophisticated and criminally involved. But that to me is not the majority of people that you're interacting with. You're interacting with people who've been touched by the child welfare system, who've been touched by the mental health system, who suffer from addiction issues, poverty, lack of opportunity. And so while they're in that correctional system, whether it's in detention or in the community, you have a real opportunity to facilitate change in their lives. But you're doing it in a system that is generally under-resourced, underappreciated, undervalued, working with staff who sometimes have lost their way in our opportunity there because of the pressure of the work and the stress and the tension of the work. So it really speaks to me about the opportunity to work with people, both who work in the system and those who are served by the system or supervised by the system, in a way that creates incredible opportunity, but you really have to think deeply and profoundly about the work.
Okay. So not a whole lot of women working in corrections back then. And I imagine as you worked your way up, there were a number of positions where you probably were the first female.
I was the first female in so many places. I was, when I went to one of the prisons I worked at, I was the first woman who had ever worked in the segregation unit. They had never had a woman work in there. They didn't particularly want women to work in there. The gentleman I had served coffee to turned around and threw the hot coffee right back in my face.
Right.
And the next year I went down, somebody threw their oatmeal at me. It was a tough place to be. And the men I worked with, while we became great partners, they didn't really want me on the tier, because being a woman on a male tier created added pressure for them. That was, welcome to being the first woman. When I joined, I joked that we were bussed in, the women were bussed in, because there were no women at the prison. There were very few women at the prison I worked at, and you were partnered when you got there. That has subsequently changed. There are so many more women, but I was the first female captain of the guard. I was the first female undersecretary. I was the first female jail administrator in Los Angeles County. I was the first female chief probation officer in Los Angeles County. And that was just 3 years ago. So there is still a ceiling in which women face, and not just women, but people of color and LGBTQ. There's other people that still have to break barriers.
Can you recall specific barriers that you encountered, and how did you overcome them?
So I found that I had to work a little bit harder. I had to learn to say what I wasn't going to tolerate. I wasn't always an older, middle-aged woman. I was actually a young woman with a lot of red hair, and I was probably relatively attractive in a place where there was a dearth of women. And so I had to be clear about why I was at work and what I was there for and what I wasn't going to do to survive in that environment. And I really learned how to find the people that just valued hard work and integrity, and there's tons of them in every category of folks that we work with. But I really did have to work. I think I had to outwork some of my counterparts.
Having to do that, did that have any type of impact on you, or did it just, I guess, enhance that work ethic and realize this is how I'm going to have to work in this male-dominated environment?
So people don't talk about the consequence of the work, right? Whether it's men or women, there's real profound consequence of the work. When I tell you that I walked down a tier and an inmate gassed me it's a traumatic event, right?
Absolutely.
It's a fear-based event. And unfortunately, the way that I dealt with it is I drank. And I drank heavily. And I suppressed the pressure. Back then, you didn't go to employee support services. They didn't have strong peer support services. You were just supposed to buck up. There were those who didn't really want women to work there, so it would have been perfectly fine with them if I would have just left. But how I dealt with it, and how many people in the business dealt with it, was through too much drinking. And as a result, I had to get sober. Unfortunately, I also had cancer. So it takes its toll. And a lot of us don't talk about it. But if more of us did talk about it, maybe younger folks or people that are suffering from it, they'll say, oh, you know what, I am drinking too much.
I think we do need to be more upfront about it, and that pressure and the willingness that this was a pretty horrible thing that happened at work today. If you've experienced, and so many of us have, where an inmate exposes himself and you don't want to overreact, but you're really really not quite sure how to manage it in an appropriate way. And so, Terri, you have a reputation about being a fixer. You've mentioned all the organizations that you went into. You went into LA County Jail in the aftermath of some things, LA probation, and even within the California Department of Corrections. You do have that reputation. So can you tell us about any success that you've had in going into either a different organization or within your own organization and help improve it?
I personally like big problems. Some people are the kind of folks that like to do long-term strategic planning. They like to refine on the edges. That's not what I like to do. I like to drop in like a parachuter into crises and just roll up my sleeves and work. In rolling up my sleeves and working, the primary thing that you do is you get other people to join you in rolling up their sleeves and working. There are tons of problems to solve. When you start in the career, you start with smaller problems like, hey, feeding is taking too long and you're not able to run the evening yard program. Can you come up with some solutions to streamline feeding that doesn't deny the inmates their time to eat, right?
Right.
So you kind of begin with those and you get some small successes on smaller projects. And then pretty soon you're running large scale projects like public safety realignment in the state of California. I was the project manager for that. That literally moved tens of thousands of people from the state supervision to local supervision. Or you go into LA County jails where over 20 employees were indicted behind prisoner abuse. And you work with the team and you work with outside providers to come up with solutions to deal with the cultural issues that give rise to that kind of abuse. Or you go into probation in Los Angeles County to do the same thing with kids. So it's mostly saying, there's a problem, I'm willing to take it on, I'm willing to have some failures, because a lot of times people won't take these on, Kathy, because they're afraid of failure, right? To me, if you're not willing to fail, then I'm not really interested in you working for me, because that means to me that you're not willing to identify problems and come up with sustainable solutions. And maybe sometimes your solutions weren't right.
How do you get people to follow you? What are the leadership traits that you have that help people recognize pretty quickly, because you don't have much time, pretty quickly, like, okay, I can get behind this woman. I will roll up my sleeves. I will work for her. I will put, myself on the line for her because I see she's the real deal.
So what I have done is I get behind them. Right? To me, the greatest way to get people to follow you is to follow them. What I had to do was build on their strengths. There's going to be consequence, and that consequence could be that you yourself become a prisoner. So set your values early and often, but there are all kinds of people that want to be great. Find those people and invest in them and let them know you're going to stand behind them. If they make a mistake, and it's an honest mistake, you're going to stand behind them. And when the fire comes, you're going to stand in front of them, right? But the greatest way to lead people is to be willing to follow their ideas, to be willing to invest in their successes, to be able to encourage their creativity. Those are the ways that you do it. The other thing you try not to do when you go in as an outsider is to tell them about all the other things the place you came from does better.
Can you think about a turning point in your career where you overcame a major obstacle or a major change that you helped enact?
So probably the biggest change I made was when I went from a line lieutenant and agreed to go work as a public information officer, administrative assistant to the warden. So a line lieutenant, every day you're doing the deal, right? You're dealing with issues, you're doing grievances, you're doing discipline, you're responding to riots, whatever it is your facility is doing. And I was working at a very active prison. And then the warden says, will you come be my administrative assistant? Well, my initial inclination was, well, no, I don't know how to do that. I don't know what that means. I don't want to be that close to the boss. I like being the PM shift lieutenant, where I'm the boss of everything. To the warden, who took a chance on me because I was kind of rough around the edges. I mean, everybody knew I would work. Everybody knew I would solve problems. Everybody knew my ethics, but I still was a little rough. She took me on, and it was through her mentorship and her guidance that she let me do all kinds of different things outside of that prison. And that got me exposure to headquarters, and it got me other places. But probably I would say that was one of the biggest turning points in my career.
So my guess would be that warden saw something in you, that you were going to be a future leader in this agency, and she was reaching out probably in a way to help you better prepare you for those roles. And I would imagine in your career, you've had a chance to do that for others.
So many people have seen things in me that I didn't see in myself.
Right.
I have seen so much talent in other people that they didn't see in themselves, because it's through that discomfort you hone your skills. Right? It begins to tumble you and smooth your edges, and you have to be willing to take those chances.
Well, 2020 has turned out to be a particularly challenging time in our country between COVID-19 pandemic and the social justice protest, which I think both of those issues have a direct impact on criminal justice agencies. How they are impacting the agencies in ways that the public may not think about.
The public may not realize many of us are also advocates, right? That's what we do. We just advocate from a different seat. And we don't always listen to the advocates to understand that if we'll just sit down and communicate and talk and listen, right? Listen, that they want the same thing we want, right? The advocates want safe communities. They want opportunity, they want success. And so I think the more that we understand that we're not opposed in end results, but we don't necessarily agree on the pathway. And I would say, in much of it, I agree. I think the United States lost its way and over-incarcerated and over-detained across America. And the communities that were the most deeply impacted are communities of color and communities of poverty. And that we treated public health crises with a law enforcement approach, and it's the wrong approach. So whether it's the crack pandemic or it's poverty, we used the wrong tool, and we used a very expensive tool and created this cycle of disruption in communities where we incarcerated entire swaths of communities and removed parents, and then the kids are in the foster system, and that creates a whole nother. And we're spending all of this money in corrections. For California, for example, over 20 prisons were built at the same time only one university was built. And so you kind of lose your way, and you're spending all your money on the back end instead of being able to spend your money on the front end. And I think if more people understood, I'm not standing alone. I'm not saying something so provocative in the business that people are shocked that I'm thinking that way. Many, many of us think that way. The problem is, how do we find our way out of it in a way that's also balanced? Because the truth of the matter is, frontline law enforcement agents are just trying to do their jobs. You know, there are bad actors in all organizations, but most people are just trying to make a difference in their community. And not everybody's out trying to harm other people in an unkind way. You need to make sure, so because I'm in law enforcement leadership circles, sometimes I look to the left and I look to the right, and there's not enough diversity in those seats. Mm-hmm. And diversity comes in so many different directions, right? Whether it's there's not enough female voices, there's not enough voices of color, there's not a voice from the LGBTQ community, there's not enough voices from different faiths and religious sectors. I think a lot of folks need to start thinking about the people that are in the positions to make the decisions around dollars and around direction really should ask the question, is it diverse enough? And if not, what do we need to do to prep the people coming up so that they can start sitting in these seats?
Have you seen any new innovations or strategies? Probably you would see it more through COVID-19 than the social justice reform, that have helped maybe address the issue that maybe are there any silver linings that we're seeing that may change the way we do business, but may not be such a bad thing, may actually help public safety, may help save costs, may do things of that nature? Have you seen any of that or been a part of any of that?
I think COVID has forced some really hardcore discussions about who are we incarcerating? You've seen decarceration at every level in the United States since COVID hit. The evidence will show over time, what happened with crime rates following that, right? It'll take time to say that. But I think if judges and prosecutors and corrections folks were willing to reduce the populations post-COVID, the question is, what should we do differently going forward? Mm-hmm. If we thought that those folks weren't a public safety risk, the question is then, should they have come in the first place? I think that's an important question. I think community-based supervision did some real soul searching about how frequently do you really need to go into people's homes and, look through their drawers. What use of technology is appropriate. I think a lot of pluses have happened because community supervisors, probation and parole, they're not spending so much time on the road driving from home to home, and they're spending more time in face-to-face conversations via telephone or via video. And they're making connections in a way that I think are more meaningful and more relaxed because the clients they don't get the anxiety of coming into the office, they're not leaving their jobs. Mm-hmm. Now, there's going to be the negatives for the folks that really are raising havoc in their homes. I think we'll learn some about that. I think in California, for example, the early release of state prisoners has led to some profound changes in how dollars have been allocated for housing releases. Prior to COVID, there wasn't a bucket of money to find emergency housing for people coming out of prison, particularly those that got realigned to the county level. Well, now there's millions of dollars on the table and hundreds of beds to say you're coming out of prison. Let's go ahead and get you into this transitional housing. And the state picked up the cost without a big legislative debate. The philanthropic community, the foundations have come forward and given more money for transitional services because those dollars are flexible. So I think a lot, and those transitional services could be food vouchers, they could be bus tickets, they could be tools for a new job that you've gotten. So there are some real pluses that I think came from a really dark place that I'm hopeful that continue to evolve as we come out of this when we do.
That's great. Can you think of any crisis that you've had to address in your career that was unexpected?
Interesting case when I was the chief deputy secretary. It was a case of a parolee by the name of Garrido. Parolee by the name of Garrido was on federal parole and transitioned to state parole. And when he was on federal parole, he kidnapped a young woman, a victim, a J.C. Lee Dugard, and held her in his backyard and did horrible, horrible things to her over a very long period of time. And she ended up having 2 children while being held hostage, and he just abused her unmercifully for a long period of time. When we became aware of that case, I was at home and I was watching the news, and there was a news story about a young woman had reappeared. And then I got a phone call from the parole director who reported to me saying, hey, we saved a young girl's life. So that's what I knew when I started that morning. Well, as the day unfolded, clearly many things had gone wrong. What started out like we saved a young girl's life really turned into what opportunities did we miss to save that girl far sooner than when she was found. It's one of those stories that stays in your heart because you have this victim of untold abuse, right? And you as a leader ask yourself, what policies, what practices could we have put into place? What opportunities did we miss organizationally to save this young girl? And it's a heavy burden you carry, all the way down to the parole officer that was supervising that said, what did I miss? What couldn't I have done? Those kind of events, whether it's a staff member suicide, an inmate suicide, a crime of untold violence that one of your clients engages in, Those are the kind of things that you don't expect. I mean, they happen, you know they're going to happen, but they can really take you to your knees. And you owe it as a leader to look deeply and profoundly in what happened and create systemic reform from those versus just saying, oh, that's a one-off. You owe it to the victims, you owe it to the organization, you owe it to the community. Those are the kind of things that leaders have to think about. I went in recently as the incident commander at San Quentin during the coronavirus, and nobody could have anticipated what would occur in that facility and facilities across the United States to the degree that's impacted facilities. And those are the kind of events leaders face.
Mm-hmm. And in kind of looking at that, how do those types of events, do you feel like stretch your own leadership? Certainly the Garrido one that was a little bit earlier on, still you were very high up in the department, but did you feel like it changed your leadership in any way?
So each one of those sentinel events do change you. They just do. There's no way they can't. You know, they hurt you, right? I mean, you have to learn how to heal through them because you do get personal organizational shame over them. But they also they should refine your commitment and your skills to look for indicators, to look for systems, to pre-think. People will tell me I'm a worst case scenario thinker because I kind of am. If somebody comes to me with a proposal and says, hey, I want to do A, B, C, and D, and I'll say, well, what about this? What about this? Losing a prison. We lost a prison yard when I was the chief deputy secretary. Those events refine your thinking and they hone your skills and they make you think 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 steps ahead of time. Doesn't mean that you won't take chances and risk, but you're more responsible in your risk taking. You're more thoughtful and deliberative in what you do, and it makes you better prepared when A, something goes wrong, or B, a lot of things don't go wrong because you've gotten better at pre-thinking. You don't know what you've averted through your experience before, right?
Leadership, acts of courage, and amazing things that other staff have done around you. And those are the kind of stories I want to emphasize, is the everyday heroism that people going behind the gate do each and every day, or going in the community or the jail or wherever it is that they're going to work and show up for, and protecting this, the public. Can you give us some examples of what you've witnessed other people do?
Yeah, I'll give you a few of them. So I'm going to do a couple of ethical courage scenarios. One of them, I was working at a prison, and when I was working at this prison, the leadership team was all removed from the prison except for me. I was a captain at the time because of some ethical lapses that had occurred. Well, and for investigation. So post-investigation, they began to return to the prison. And the warden at the time, the warden who came in, had given direction that was not the right direction, and we were in the command leadership room. And so the warden gave direction, and one of the associate wardens, who's below a warden, and wardens are gods, right? I mean, they don't track of everything. Right. The associate warden, who's a rank above me, said, "Warden, we're not going to do that, sir." And and the warden said, "Oh, I think you are." And the associate warden says, "No, sir, we're not going to do that. It's not the right thing to do. Here's why it's not the right thing to do. Here's some other ways that we can accomplish what you want." He gave solutions. He explained why he didn't think it was a good idea. And the warden says, "No, I'm ordering you guys to do it." The associate warden, in what could be termed as insubordination, said, "I'm not doing it. I'm directing everybody in this room not to do it. I've told them why, and I'm getting ready to call headquarters." Now, in a culture where code of silence has been a problem, and all law enforcement agencies suffer from this code of silence, in a culture in which rank matters and we're supposed to follow orders, it demonstrated to me profound courage to say, I'm not doing it, and I'll suffer whatever consequences that are going to come from telling you no, warden. But not only am I not going to do it, I'm protecting everybody around me because I'm giving them permission to say no.
That's great. What a great example. The fact that somebody was willing to do that.
If more people did that, more people would stay out of trouble. I tell anybody that works for me, I tell them, if I'm doing something illegal, immoral, unlawful, you need to tell me.
Right.
And you need to tell me to stop. And if I insist on doing it, you need to tell on me in writing.
Right.
Because I'm not going to do something immoral, unlawful, but
Right.
it's fires, running into riots, running in to save people's lives. Those are untold. But there's one more act that struck me that I think is important and struck me to my core. When I was the chief probation officer in Los Angeles County, they were doing a toy giveaway in one of the area offices. And so I went to give out toys and do Christmas carols and all of that. And then I walked into the area office to see any staff in the area. And there was a deputy probation officer, and she was trying to come out of her office, her little cube area. And I was going cube to cube. And most people will hang around when the chief comes in to talk. And she says, "Chief, I got to go. I'm in a hurry. I don't mean to be rude, but I got to go." So I thought she had to go to court, because you wouldn't normally just leave your cube when the chief comes in to talk to you. And she had she grabbed a couple of bags of food. And I said, where are you going? And she said, "Well, I had to revoke one of my clients yesterday because he was dealing drugs." She said, "But it is Christmas Eve, and I know his family doesn't have any food, and he's got children. And so I'm going to run the food by his house. He's accountable for his actions, but he has children that I don't want not to have dinner tonight."
Wow.
That takes courage.
Right.
To say, my humanity isn't squashed by my responsibility to public safety.
Absolutely.
And if more people could know that that's corrections.
Thank you for joining me today to listen to Terri McDonald's journey through corrections, LA County Jail, and LA County Probation and Parole. She is a gifted leader who has transformed a number of organizations and continues to share her expertise in the criminal justice field.